Hello. Here we have a lesson on testosterone dominance and aggression to get a sense of what some of the relationships are. Testosterone is well supported for causing, or at least is related to, aggressive behavior. Decades of supporting evidence for this, and no one really disputes that there's a causal relationship. But the causal relationship is a bit what we call uneven. That means there's some support, but there's also some confusing findings out there that don't really make sense in a simple relationship. Now, James Dabbs discusses this relationship as really about dominance, that aggression is just one way to exhibit dominance, that you can have high-powered jobs, fast cars, political ascendancy, acquisition of money, any number of ways of being dominant, acquiring a sense of status over others, or possibly even influencing or controlling others. And so some surprising professions sometimes are associated with high levels of testosterone. Lawyers, actors, ministers tend to have, not guaranteed to, tend to have higher levels of testosterone than persons not in those professions. And so that's another explanation for these. These are not fields that we typically think of as aggressive per se, but they do tend to be fields where persons have at least some sense of status or control over how others are thinking or acting. Testosterone is responsive to situations in which status changes, really dominant situations. So not only does testosterone appear to lead to certain behavioral outcomes, but certain experiences and behavioral outcomes lead to changes in testosterone. For instance, in athletic competitions, the athletic competitors, the persons on the field, when they win, they have increases in testosterone. And that might be argued as, well, I am being physical. But that's not the only thing. The chess competitions, we also see testosterone rising in the victors. Now there, you're not having this physicality on the field effect. This is mental challenges, mental status gains only. And so you start to become kind of convinced that this is about status and dominance more than it's about physical violence, aggression. And even further bring home that point, we see sports spectators, when their favorite team wins, we see a rise in testosterone in them. We'll talk a little bit more about these in a bit. Now, a Scientific American article pointed out that testosterone is definitely not definitively related to aggression, that social situations seem to be important to aggression also. And in fact, it's about how we choose to express dominance, maybe more controlled by the social situation than simple testosterone. The testosterone is kind of a facilitator, but is not the be-all and end-all controlling factor. To explore this factor, beyond just what the Scientific American article talked about, we need to learn a bit about what's called the frustration-aggression hypothesis to explain it. So let's take this little sidetrack for a moment. In 1939, Dollard, working with others at Yale University, came to the conclusion that the best way to explain aggression was through frustration, that comes from goals being blocked, and that when you're frustrated, you're always motivated to aggress, and all aggression comes from frustration. Now, on its face, this seems unlikely to be true. It has uneven support, in fact, which you'll be glad to know, because if your first reaction was, that doesn't sound quite right to me, that would be good thinking. We do know that some experimental findings showed that the relationship between frustration and aggressive behavior is definitely there. But numerous incidents of life and research studies found that that it's not all aggression can be attributed to frustration, and not all frustrating events lead to aggression. We have all kinds of incidents of aggression that don't have any evidence of frustration in life. Athletes on the field are engaging in numerous acts of what could be arguably called aggression, but they're not coming necessarily from frustration. And then sometimes we see athletes on the field actually act in ways that are unambiguously aggressive, when they throw a punch at another player, or when they pull the hair of another player, as I saw in a soccer game the other day, or trip a player up, or all kinds of other misbehaviors of that type. And when we're seeing that kind of thing, you can usually track it back to some kind of frustration happening in the game beyond the normal frustrations that are within the rules. That's the difference, within the rules or not within the rules. And so to kind of clear up some of these differences, some of the fact that we see aggression happen in some situations related to frustration but not in other situations, Berkowitz comes along in 1989 and adds a crucial factor, negative affect. Negative affect is negative feelings. Only when the frustration is associated with negative feelings does it lead to aggression. On the surface, that doesn't seem like a big deal because isn't frustration inherently negative? Well, yeah, I mean, it's kind of the nature of the beast, except it's about the negative feelings kind of being connected to a sense of unfairness, improper frustration, something that doesn't belong, that kind of thing. So negative feelings are highly likely when we perceive the frustrating others having a choice to not frustrate us. See, when you're playing the soccer game, when you're playing softball, that's the other team's job is to frustrate you. So that's fine. They really don't have a choice. On the other hand, when they grab your hair in the bottom of the tackle pile in football, or when they trip you or elbow you in the gut, that's outside the rules. And it's easy to become frustrated and want to act back in a way that's also outside the rules. That one factor, negative affect, clarified a lot of the uneven findings. You go back through the literature and start looking at the studies that showed the connection between frustration and aggression and did not show it, and you would find that Berkowitz adding negative affect helped to make all of those findings make sense. A powerful a revision to the frustration-aggression hypothesis. So that's where we understand that to be at this point, that particular factor. But there's also, because we're talking about testosterone, we want to get back to psychophysiological factors or endocrine factors. And so first, testosterone. Testosterone, we show high levels of correlations with aggression. We notice from DABS that it's really about dominance behavior. Aggression is just one way. And testosterone is also associated with seeking out opportunities to increase status. That is, looking for a chance to be in a competition. If you have higher testosterone, you're more likely to seek out a chance to be in a competition. And that's interesting also. It's not just about gaining status and having more testosterone. It's about seeking out the opportunity to get status if you have higher testosterone. Testosterone is affected by the outcome of the contest, as we were saying earlier. We see it more in winners and losers of contests, the athletic contest, and others. We see that associated with winners. A study that I did on fans of soccer and basketball games found that, and Stanton did for supporters of Obama versus McCain after the 2008 election, is that those that had felt their team had won, their side had won in the case of the political study, had increases in testosterone, and those that had diminished sense of status because their team had lost or their side had lost in the election had a decrease in testosterone. And so what we get then is an understanding that increases in status are associated with increased testosterone and decreases in status are associated with reduced testosterone. We think that these things may be related. The evidence for this is uneven. May be related to post-victory assaults and riots. There are several studies on this, but the results are not entirely conclusive. So we have more work to do there. We also know that another factor is involved, serotonin, the neurotransmitter. Low amounts of serotonin appears to also be involved in aggression. This neurotransmitter is classically associated with depression, and in fact is, but it's also associated with negative affect in general. That is, a person who has low testosterone tends to perceive things more negatively. It's also associated with impulse control. A person with low serotonin tends to have lower impulse control. They're more likely to act out on their impulses rather than pausing and thinking for a moment before acting out. And finally, probably due to these two factors, it's associated with aggressive behavior. Well, how does this all make sense now? We've got factors that are associated with physiology, hormones, neurotransmitters, and we've got this classic theory coming out of social psychology. And what we get from that is an integrated model that I proposed in 1997 that combines the influences of testosterone and serotonin. We consider it consistent with the frustration-aggression hypothesis. We see that high testosterone is linked to an increase in status-seeking behaviors, dominance seeking, and that increases the likelihood of encountering a frustrating event. If you're not seeking out a chance to test your status, you're not likely to become frustrated. But if you are seeking an opportunity to increase your status, then you have the chance of failing at that, of having a frustration in that seeking. Low serotonin is associated with an increased response to negative or aversive stimuli. And therefore, a person who is both high in testosterone and low in serotonin is likely to interpret the frustration they may receive from a failed attempt to increase status as interpreting it in a more negative fashion, interpreting it aversively or negatively. And that is where we possibly see the increase in the likelihood of aggressive behavior. What I discuss in my 1997 paper is that we see evidence of the combination of low serotonin and high testosterone being associated with aggression in several animal studies. What we don't see is any of that work yet done in human studies, though we see separate work of serotonin and testosterone. When we look at this model and we combine it with the frustration-aggression hypothesis, we see that over there on the right, encountering a frustrating event, interpreting it as aversive, therefore increasing the likelihood of aggressive behavior. And so from this we can see how the combination of the factors we have found from psychophysiology works along with a classic theory of aggression from social psychology to give us an understanding of how we can reasonably model at least some classes of aggressive behavior. So we can think of the frustration-aggression hypothesis as not dead. In fact, it seems very much alive because it works well with what we know from physiological studies. So it's a key theory we use to explain a lot of aggressive behavior to this day. In conclusion, we want to say, yes, testosterone is related to aggression. That's just a manifestation of dominance behaviors, a certain way to get there. There are lots of ways to be dominant other than aggression. The real likelihood of aggression coming from testosterone is when a person is frustrated and it perceives that frustration as coming from an unfair place. That cheating was involved, misbehavior was involved, breaking of the rules was involved, or an otherwise erroneous thing happened, and it makes the person feel bad about it. Life is filled with frustrations, but not all frustrations feel unfair or wrong. And when they feel that way, then the person feels like they have to find a path to balance the scales, and that's where we have a chance of seeing aggression. So the next time you're reading in the news about a person engaging in an aggressive act, when you read about or hear about terrorism, think about the possibility of frustration and unfairness and a sense of it all being wrong that may be in that person's mind. Not to excuse the act, but to maybe understand it a little better. Thank you for your attention. I hope you enjoyed it.